Welcome back to the deep dive. Look, we usually start these with a bit of banter, maybe a fun fact, but today we are looking at a document that landed on my desk this morning, January 16th, 2026, and frankly, it just demands we get straight to the point.
It really does.
The position paper, and the title alone is enough to just, make the room go quiet.
It is. It's titled Black African Holocaust They Do Not Want to Acknowledge. And the author, Jimma Dogon, who is writing as an advocate for Black African people worldwide, isn't mincing words here at all.
Not at all.
The subtitle lays out the scope immediately. Global Enslavement and Colonization of Black Africans. Why Truth, Depth, and Historical Accuracy Matter.
It's intense. And I think for a lot of people, the immediate reaction might be, okay, I know this history, I know about slavery, I know about colonization. But reading through this, McWilson is arguing that actually most of us don't know the history.
Or at least we don't know the full architecture of it.
Exactly. He's framing this not just as a series of bad things that happened a long time ago, but as a specific, calculated geopolitical structure.
And that distinction is vital. He's moving the conversation away from tragedy and toward atrocity. A tragedy feels, accidental, and atrocity is engineered.
Right.
And before we really get into the weeds here, we should acknowledge the tone. McWilson explicitly states that this is all grounded in verified historical facts and primary source records. He is challenging the standard narrative, but he's doing it with data. He wants to disrupt how this history is, sanitized in textbooks.
Sanitized. That's the word that kept coming up for me.
Yeah.
We like our history to have clean edges, don't we? But let's look at his opening salvo, the statement of position. He argues that the enslavement of African people was not incidental.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read incidental, I think of a byproduct like, okay, we wanted cheap sugar, so slavery just happened.
Mm-hmm.
But McWilson is saying, no, you're missing the point entirely.
He's arguing the dehumanization wasn't a side effect, it was the product. He defines the event as systematic, legalized, racialized, and transnational. It wasn't a few rogue captains or a few bad decades.
Right.
He's describing a system sustained by the highest levels of government, empires, and, even religious authorities. It's the difference between a crime committed by a person and a crime committed by a state.
And he uses some terminology here that I really want to dig into because usually these words just sort of float past us. Chattel slavery.
Yeah.
We hear it in school, we write it on the test, we move on. But McWilson attaches a specific definition, reducing human beings to inheritable property.
And it's that word inheritable that changes everything.
Yes. That stopped me cold. Because it's not just about owning labor. It's about owning the future. It's owning someone's children before they are even conceived.
That's the unique horror he's pointing to. In many ancient systems of slavery, and he does acknowledge this context, you might be enslaved because of a debt or because you lost a war, but your status wasn't necessarily stamped onto your genetic line forever.
It didn't follow your bloodline.
Exactly. Chattel, in this context, means the human being is converted entirely into an asset, like livestock or real estate, and that asset status is passed down.
He also throws a phrase in there that I don't think I've ever seen in a standard textbook. Legalized dehumanization, creating a
racial caste system.
A racial caste system, yes. Usually the argument is economic. It was about free labor. But McWilson seems to be saying that if you only look at the economics, you miss the caste element. Why is that distinction so important to his argument?
Because if it's just about labor, then once the work is done or the economic model changes, the people should theoretically be free to integrate. But a racial caste system suggests the goal was to create a permanent underclass.
Okay, so it's not just a means to an end.
No. He writes that blackness itself was defined as permanent enslavement. It shifts the focus from what the enslaved people did to what they were in the eyes of the law. The laws, all the royal decrees, the slave codes, they were designed to strip away personhood, not just extract sweat.
It's like identity engineering.
That's a very powerful way to put it, yes.
And if we're talking about engineering, we have to talk about the architects. This is where the paper really zooms out. I think there's a tendency, especially in the West, to make this a very Atlantic-centric conversation.
Mm-hmm. The triangle.
Right, the triangle, Europe, Africa, the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
But McWilson says not so fast. He refuses to isolate responsibility to just one region.
He casts a global net. And this is uncomfortable for a lot of historical narratives. He obviously lists the European powers, the financiers, the transporters, and he lists the American colonial states that built their economies on this. But he explicitly includes Middle Eastern states and empires.
And that's a huge piece of the puzzle that often gets left out of the popular conversation, isn't it?
It is. McWilson notes that Middle Eastern states maintained African slavery for centuries. He actually points to domestic, military, and commercial systems there. By including this, he's challenging you, the listener, to see this as a truly global phenomenon.
So it wasn't just the West.
No. It was a world order where black bodies were a currency across continents.
And he doesn't let the institutions off the hook either. He specifically names religious and imperial institutions.
Yes. We're talking about the moral authorities of the time, churches, mosques, crowns sanctioning this.
Which reinforces his point about it being legalized. These weren't crimes happening in the dark.
No, they were policies debated and blessed in the cathedrals and palaces. It was a collaborative effort across different political and religious regimes.
Okay, so we have the definition and we have the players.
Yeah.
But the core of this paper, I mean, the part that I found really, really demanding to read, is a section on why this was an atrocity of unusual depth.
I agree.
He lists 5 pillars. And I want to take a minute on these because I feel like this is where the simplified version of history usually fails us.
This is the analytical engine of the paper. He isn't comparing suffering. He's not saying this was worse than that. He's analyzing the mechanisms that made this specific Holocaust so unique.
We touched on the first 2, permanence of status and racialization. The idea that you are enslaved for life and it's because of your skin color. But then he hits us with pillar number 3, scale and duration.
The numbers here are just, it's hard to wrap your mind around them.
He mentions the Atlantic trade, which is 4 centuries, 400 years. That's already a massive amount of time. But then he references the Trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean trades and uses the word millennium.
A millennium.
I had to put the paper down for a second. We aren't talking about an era. We are talking about entire civilizations rising and falling while this system just kept running in the background.
Think about that. A millennium is enough time for a language to evolve, for religions to be born and die. McWilson is arguing that when a system of exploitation lasts that long, over 1,000 years in some regions, it doesn't just affect the people alive at the time.
No.
It embeds itself into the DNA of the culture. It shapes how the world perceives value, humanity, and hierarchy. You can't just get over a millennium of history in a few generations.
It becomes the background noise of the world. It's just how things are.
Precisely. And that leads to his 4th pillar, total systems control. This challenges the idea that slavery was just a job you couldn't quit.
Right.
He lists what the government regulated: movement, families, bodies, labor, identity.
That's the totalitarian aspect. You couldn't marry without permission. You couldn't walk down the road without a pass. Your children weren't yours. I mean, it reminds me of dystopian fiction, but it was historical reality for millions.
It was a complete co-opting of the human experience. And that control didn't stop when the laws changed. This is pillar number 5, and arguably the most critical point for understanding today: post-abolition continuity.
This is the yes but section.
It is. McWilson argues that abolition ended ownership, but it did not end domination.
So the chains are off, but the cage is still there.
That's a perfect analogy. He lists the specific mechanisms that replaced chattel slavery immediately: convict leasing, forced labor, sharecropping, colonial rule, racial terror.
So it just shape-shifted.
Exactly. His argument is that we look at dates like 1865 as a finish line, but for the people on the ground, it was just a rebranding. The system went from I own you to I control you through debt or laws or violence.
Which effectively maintained the racial hierarchy without the bad PR of slavery.
Exactly. And this is why he argues you can't understand the present without this specific lens. If you think the system broke in 1865, you can't explain 2026.
And that transitions perfectly to the impact section, because McWilson is really aggressive here, in a good way, about public responsibility. He has this line, education without truth is indoctrination.
It's a stinging indictment of how we teach history. He argues that when schools omit this or soften it or, summarize it in 2 paragraphs, they are teaching false neutrality.
What does that mean, false neutrality?
It's implicitly telling students that the world is fair and that everyone started from the same starting line.
Ah, I see. And he connects this directly to modern economics. He says, quote, modern inequality did not appear spontaneously.
Right. If you have a wealth gap today or global underdevelopment in the global south, McWilson says you have to trace that back to the extraction of wealth we just discussed, its cause and effect. He argues that denying this history does 3 specific things. It dismisses African suffering, it undermines African humanity, and crucially, it perpetuates racial myths.
That last one is interesting, perpetuating racial myths.
Well, think about it. If you see a group of people struggling globally, and you don't know about the millennium of extraction and the total systems control we just talked about,
Yeah.
what conclusion do you draw?
You assume there's something wrong with the people.
Exactly. You blame the victim because you can't see the crime. Denial creates a vacuum where racist myths can flourish. Truth fills that vacuum with context.
So we've laid out the horror, the scope, the legacy. Now, usually this is the part of the conversation where people get defensive. They say, well, I didn't own slaves. My ancestors were poor farmers. Why are you yelling at me? But McWilson actually addresses this head on.
He does, and it's a vital pivot in the text. The section is titled, Why This Is Not About Guilt But Responsibility. McWilson writes very clearly, this position paper does not seek individual blame.
Which is surprising, maybe, to some listeners who expect this to be an attack.
It's not an attack on individuals, it's an audit of institutions. He is seeking institutional honesty. He isn't asking for you, the listener, to feel guilty. He is asking for nations, for governments, for educational systems and religious bodies to admit to the record.
And he has a 4-point checklist for what that admission looks like. It's not just, I'm sorry.
No, it's much more specific.
Okay.
He wants these institutions to say, 1, yes, this happened. 2, yes, it was legal and intentional, not accidental.
Okay.
3, yes, Africans were targeted specifically as Africans. And 4, yes, the consequences remain.
That last one, yes, the consequences remain. That seems like the sticking point. I feel like a lot of institutions are happy to say it happened and it was bad, but admitting the consequences remain implies you have to do something about it now.
That's the rub. As the text says, truth must no longer be negotiated. If you admit the consequences are still here, in the wealth gaps, in education, in geopolitical hierarchies, then logic dictates you have to address them.
You can't just apologize for the past if the past is still active in the present.
Exactly. It moves the timeline from history to current events, and that's why institutional honesty is so difficult. It's not just a press release, it's a commitment to repair.
So what is the goal here? Is it just to make us feel bad? Is it to rewrite textbooks? McWilson wraps this up with a pretty profound statement on why we need to do this.
He writes as a Black African, and he calls this a moral, educational, and historical obligation. But the goal isn't shame. The goal is reconciliation. He argues that the only path to true repair and equity is through this door of radical truth.
You can't fix a broken bone if you pretend the leg is fine.
That's it. The record is clear. The evidence is documented. The suffering was real. That's how he closes it. It's a demand to stop looking away.
To witness the history as it actually was, not as we wish it had been.
Precisely.
You know, we started this deep dive talking about a document on a desk. But by the end of it, I feel like we're looking at the foundation of the house we're all living in. McWilson is basically pointing at the cracks in the foundation and saying, we can't just paint over these anymore.
And he's saying that the house was built this way on purpose. That's the scary part, but it's also the liberating part. Because if it was built this way, it can be rebuilt.
That's a hopeful spin on a very heavy text. But it brings me back to that concept of post-abolition continuity. The idea that the systems of control didn't die, they just evolved.
Right. They put on a suit and tie.
Exactly. So here is the thought I'm left with, and I want to leave you, the listener, with this too. If we accept McWilson's premise that the caste system never actually ended, but just swapped out its mechanisms, it forces you to look around 2026 with fresh eyes.
It certainly does.
We aren't looking for chains anymore. So what are the mechanisms active right now? What are the policies, the algorithms, the economic structures that we are going to look back on in 100 years and say, that was the continuity, that was the cage?
That is the uncomfortable question. But asking it is the first step of that responsibility McWilson is talking about.
It's not about the past. It's about recognizing the past in the present. Jimma Matt, Dogon McWilson gave us the map. Now we have to figure out where we are standing on it. Thanks for taking this dive with us. It wasn't a light one, but it was a necessary one.
Absolutely. Thank you.